The world is in the most dangerous moment than it has been for 4 decades. The first Cold War ended in 1989-91, and then we anticipated a type of peace, global peace establishing, instead of which the world has slid into a second Cold War. Of course, the notion of a Cold War does not cover everything, but it does cover a lot of things, and that is the demonization of the enemy, the refusal to engage in diplomacy, and of course it has led to renewed conflict in Europe, where we have the worst war since 1945. The thing is that in a lot of the discussion which we've been having is, in my view, rather conceptually confused. I argue that we need to distinguish very clearly between the international system that is today based on the United Nations, based on the United Nations Charter, and the body of international law that has developed since 1945. Within this international system, we have competing models of world order. We used to have the Soviet Union and its model of socialist internationalism that collapsed in 1989-91. But the US-led political West, as I call it, after 1989, claimed to be universal. It claimed that the so-called rules-based order, the liberal international order, was in effect the system itself. I argue that this was a type of usurpation, a type of dethroning of what should be international law, and in its place they put the so-called rules-based. Whose rules? Based on what law? So it was a fundamental challenge, and this is the source of much of the tensions in international politics today. So we have the domain of the international system, the rule of international law. Incidentally, the 4 major Chinese initiatives, including the recent Global Governance Initiative, appeal to precisely the United Nations and Charter principles, which is very important. In other words, it is displacing the claim of the US-led political West to be the equivalent for global order. Of course, today, the West itself is under major challenge. This political West, its 2 wings, the European and the United States, are beginning to diverge. The United States is reneging and leaving not just the political West, it is also leaving and challenging the international system, that is the United Nations and a whole system of international organizations which are based or established within its framework. And so, we are facing a time of extreme turbulence, but also a time of incredible intellectual or conceptual confusion. And my work is an attempt to establish some sort of framework for understanding. And once we have this framework for understanding, we could then devise strategies, political strategies in response. So if you see the Trumpian phenomenon, for example, as a number of defections, the United States is defecting not only from the political West, its US-led alliance system with Europeans, it's defecting from the international system, that is the United Nations and its organizations. It's also defecting domestically from its own constitution, and of course dismantling its own so-called administrative state. And even it's undermining the 5th defection, which is from the model of international political economy, which it has championed since 1945. This leaves Europe in total confusion. It doesn't know what to do. At the moment, it wants to intensify the conflict with Russia, which is madness, because we've always argued all the way back, the Gaullist idea, that we need a security order all the way from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Of course, this is not going to happen now, so it leaves Europe completely bereft and directionless and increasingly aggressive and dangerous. China, of course, with India and the global south, Brazil, partners in BRICS, is establishing, but don't forget, the BRICS is not an alternative international system. The BRICS is simply, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, elements underneath the international system, not a substitute for it. So that's where I see things are today. And so the final comment I'd say is that, of course, the world is looking for leadership from China from India and from its partners in the global south to establish a framework for peace and development. This is the big challenge facing the world today, if we survive.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌帮助了睡眠品质。现在呢，进一步推出晚安加强版，添加了首创最适合台湾人体质的天然 GABA、色氨酸、茶氨酸、香蜂草4大天然草本助眠配方，强化睡眠全期都起到放松舒眠的效果。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它本身就含有台大专利授权克菲尔乳杆菌 M1 等8种专利菌，首创益生菌、益生元、后生元黄金3角配方，帮助维持消化道的机能。有季节敏感、代谢困扰、关心异常细胞风险的好朋友呢，可以选择原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有超级食物羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。选择太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，做好日常保养，实现睡眠自由，身体轻松无负担。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good， 请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。